Keeping you safe and sorting out the lies from the truth is your job. When we talk about misinformation, we always focus on the producers, never the consumers, as if we're all helpless, dumb blondes ready to believe anything, like Donald Trump. Now, do lies spread faster than they used to? Of course, but so can truth, which in the internet age is always at your fingertips. You just have to learn how to use Google for something other than porn.
Good morning. It's Friday, Aristotle Friday, October the 27th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and a flamenco tune, we will have No Free Lunch, Murder Not Shooting, Varney and Company, My Take, Lawyers, Rules for Retrogrades, Rules for Patriots, Rules for Radical Conservatives, Bishop-barron, Ayn Rand Quote, Greg Gutfeld, and Aristotle for Everybody. Difficult Thought Made Easy. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
Creative destruction. Capitalism, then, is by nature a form or method of economic change, and not only never is, but never can be stationary. The fundamental impulse that sets and keeps the capitalist engine in motion comes from the new consumers' goods, the new methods of production or transportation, the new markets, the new forms of industrial organization that capitalist enterprise creates. Joseph A. Schumpeter. Free enterprise is evolutionary by definition, and if it were not, it would lack the innovation to meet demand. Every variable in the system changes, evolves, and improves. And with these tiers of change comes unimaginable flourishing, and yes, along the way, destruction. That this destruction is necessary for the greater flourishing that flows from it does not negate the reality of short-term pain. But it does give wise men and women pause before intervening.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for radical conservatives.
That annoyingly haunts me, and should haunt you too, since it's the fate we have in store for you. Mellish, who's been carrying a Hitler Youth dagger, eventually winds up in a desperate hand-to-hand battle with Steamboat Willie, which ends with the German plunging the Hitler Jugend knife slowly into Mellish's heart, whispering softly to him to give up. It's easier this way. Let's end this. Well, think of us as Steamboat Willie. I guess you can figure out who you are in this scenario. For the truth is, it really is easier our way. No more being sneered at and chastised for your superstitious beliefs and your impossible standards. No more thrashing about in the unequal struggle. No humiliating pleading for your life, as Mellish does, as would we all. No being conquered by a superior force and being forced to pay the ultimate penalty as your killer looks you in the eye and whispers sweet nihilist nothings in your dying ears. You too can be one of the cool kids. Join us. If not, well, you know the consequences. Look at what we've done to you. We have made you a stranger in your own country. And if you continue to resist us, we will make you a criminal. Yes, a criminal. Because that is the ultimate goal of our long march through the institutions. Our long march from the philosophy of Rousseau through the founding principles of Marxism-Leninism, through the arrival on your shores of the Frankfurt School, through the penetration of your institutions by waves of subversives and outright Soviet illegals, American-born agents in place, whose first allegiance was to international socialism, prepped and fed and watered and cared for, as they scooted through your civil society and brought you to the pretty pass you find yourselves in today. We are so close. All we need is for you to stay asleep just a little bit longer. My father, the sainted Che Kahane, has told me stories about a different America, one that existed not long ago. A country where in the summers, kids were told to go outside and play and come home at dinner time. And if you got into any trouble, Gaia help you. A country where not all priests were gay child molesters, for that's the way you think of them now, isn't it? A country that was not afraid of inanimate objects like guns and Swiss Army knives. A country where public and private morality were riven by a Chinese wall and nobody wished it otherwise. A country where crime was an individual's responsibility, not society's, and where the guilty were punished and only their relatives mourned them instead of the press. What a horrible, reactionary, illiberal place it was. Take Gun Crazy. Few of you have seen it, although you film buffs might know it by reputation. Suffice it to say, it is one of those American film noirs made in 1950, when your country, I say your country, because I do not yet think of it as my country, although it will be soon enough, was fresh off its victory in World War II and secure in its sense of itself. Gun Crazy, made on a shoestring, told the tale of a boy who liked guns, who falls in with a girl who also likes guns, and it all ends badly. But here's the thing. It's not an anti-gun movie. Hard to believe, huh? Watch this picture today and tell me that you don't shudder at almost every frame. The way the boys casually take their rifles, sling them over their shoulders, and go hunting in the hills. The way the hero/bad kid tries to steal a gun and quite naturally gets sentenced to reform school without anyone much worrying about root causes. The way the lovers die, he killing her out of love because for them there's no way out. And the way nobody mourns them. The last words of the script imply relief that the sheriff and his men who have hunted them down are all right. In other words, the bad apples got what was coming to them, and they were going to have to sort it out in the afterlife. Today, we see it through a different prism. We see it as a depiction of what a terrible place this country was more than half a century ago. A country where, a country where people were left alone to play out their own destinies. And we can't have that, can we? As the criminals' rights movement proceeded apace from the 1960s onward, root causes became more important than the crime, and the perpetrator became a public figure, an object of sympathy, while the victim moldered, quickly forgotten in his grave. Fundamental change. We have unleashed an army of lawyers against you, whom you then put into elective office. An army of unelected regulators who take the self-serving laws made by our fleet of ambulance-chasing torchshysters and proclaim and implement new and ever more onerous rules and strictures. An army of unfireable bureaucrats and permanent civil servants who now make more money than you, get better benefits than you do, and expect you to support them forever in the pasha styles to which they have become accustomed. Eventually, all these sacred promises will come due. And do you think the party of take is ever going to vote itself a pay cut? Please. Every step we've taken since the baby boomer generation came of age during the blood and fire of 1968 has been taken in the name of individual freedom. But in reality, all we have done, and all we intend to do, was to limit that individual freedom, to strip it out of your social institutions, your daily life, and your government. A nation of laws, not men, we solemnly intoned during the Nixon impeachment hearings. But what you fools didn't realize was that what we meant to do henceforth was not to observe the Constitution's precepts of limited government and enumerated powers, but to greatly expand it in creative ways the founders, those racists, never would have dreamed of. A nation of laws, not men, may have sounded good, but what we really meant by it was to tie you down with laws, turn you into, in the words of the Vietnam era, a pitiful, helpless giant. So look at yourself in the mirror. You can't fight back in the many states in which you have an affirmative duty to retreat to a place of safety should one of our beloved predators come a-calling on you and your family. You can't sue the state that let him loose. You can't vote the bums out because the new bums are even worse. As The Who, my dad's second favorite rock band from the 1960s, right after the Rolling Stones, famously sang, "Meet the new boss, same as the old boss." You can't buy the car you want. You can't buy the light bulbs you want. You want to add a bathroom? Permit. Build a new garage? Permit. Fill in that swamp in the backyard? Ha! Pretty soon, you won't even be able to sell your house without a government permit. If you run afoul of our lawyer-designed and operated tax code, backed by the enforcement brigades of the IRS, we'll nail you. And speaking of the IRS, just wait. Hoo-ha! till you get a gander at the glorious new people's healthcare system we've designed for you. Cradle-to-grave shared misery in the best socialist tradition. Each jot and tittle backed up by oodles of new regulations to be overseen by scads of newly minted bureaucrats whose operating principle is simple. Guilty until proven innocent. But guilty anyway, and all enforceable by your friends at the Internal Revenue Service. Kafka would be so proud. In short, we've made the old adage come true. You can't fight City Hall. In 1968, Andy Warhol famously said that in the future, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes. When we finally get our way, after fundamental change is fully effected, everyone will be a criminal for at least 15 minutes. Except, of course, us. And you know what happens to criminals.
And that was Chapter 6 of Rules for Radical Conservatives. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades. 40 tactics to defeat the radical left.
Rule 6. Never compromise with radicals on their initiatives. Radicals work to implement the progressive agenda in increments. We can thus call their method incrementalism. There are a couple reasons for this. Were radicals to impose their disordered worldview all at once, it would prove so unnatural and dystopian that it would forever shatter the common man's perception of progressivism as a viable political philosophy. Since many of the ideas of radicals are so far out of the mainstream of Western convention, to avoid backlash, their ideas must be introduced slowly and methodically so as to gradually acclimate people to the brave new world, desensitizing them to its bitterness. Moreover, to hoodwink opposing political parties and to circumvent political resistance, radicals must advance their ideas slowly till such time as they achieve a critical mass, a tipping point at which their perverse ideas have taken root in the hearts and minds of the voting populace. Only then can their end game, their true vision, be revealed, insulated from the hazard of political consequence. Because incrementalism is at the nucleus of radicals' blueprint for capturing the culture, and because radicals are, at this point, the active principle driving cultural change, compromising on disputed issues invariably works in their favor. Consider, for instance, a debate on raising taxes. Let's imagine that a radical lawmaker floats the idea of a 90% federal income tax rate for top wage earners in order to ameliorate a budget deficit. Imagine, too, that one of the radical lawmakers' so-called moderate confrères retorts that a 90% income tax is unreasonable and proposes a mere 50% income tax. After some haggling, perhaps the lawmakers decide to compromise and agree on a 70% income tax rate for top earners. Suppose now that in ensuing years, irresponsible government spending yields yet another deficit. The same radical lawmaker, as is his habit, will again propose raising taxes in an effort to cure the deficit. Again, he will float the 90% income tax number. Again, the radicals' moderate confrère will balk at the 90% figure, but wanting to be reasonable and address the looming deficit, The moderate will this time propose splitting the difference and bringing the income tax rate up to a more palatable 80% rate. Should this cycle of punctuated creep be allowed to continue over time, the radical will eventually taste the 90% rate he had been clamoring for all along. While he could not have succeeded in having his demands met at first by working in increments, by appearing reasonable and settling for a series of upward ascending compromises, the radical has ultimately prevailed. A series of compromises inevitably leads to the active party achieving total victory, since with each successive compromise, the end goal is brought that much nearer. It should also be noted that radicals habitually use ground gained in previous victories as launching points for future attacks. When they make inroads through compromise, they use their forward momentum to springboard themselves to further conquests. Consider the issue of women clergy. Radicals can't simply demand that women immediately assume roles as high-ranking prelates in the church. They'd be laughed out of town. Such a change would be too drastic an overhaul, too severe a breach with timeless tradition, to merit serious consideration. And radicals know this all too well. So they take a more cunning tack to achieve their goal. They complain that women are underrepresented in the church, and that in order to fully make use of women's surplus talents, they need more access to even modest positions of leadership and responsibility. As such, radicals may propose that women should have access to lower clerical positions, to the diaconate perhaps. And if, in an ill-conceived attempt to sate feminist lust for power, the church were to try to accommodate such demands and indulge radical women by appointing them deaconesses, it would be only a matter of time before radicals pointed to the deaconesses that had achieved a certain amount of renown or stature and pointedly inquire, why, since these women have fulfilled their lower clerical duties with such distinction and aplomb, should they be prohibited from acquiring the office of priestess? Pressing their advantage, they would put the church on the spot by asking the very questions whose unseemly answers were the impetus for its initial capitulation. In pressing their advantage in this way, radicals would continue to gain ground at an exponentially increasing pace. If this pattern were allowed to continue unabated, given the passage of enough time, eventually, women would attain the papacy. Radicals rely on incrementalism, and incrementalism thrives on a system of compromise. Hence, the retrograde must never compromise with the radical on a disputed issue. He must steadfastly refuse to give ground, gnashing his teeth before budging an inch. In this way, we can blunt the advance of radicalism and begin to make our own headway in the culture wars.
And that was Rule 6, Rules for Retrogrades, Timothy Gordon and David Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Rules for Patriots by Steve Deese.
Chapter 12, Conclusion. For a while now, you've suspected your wife hasn't been telling you everything. She's always cared about her appearance, but lately she's been piling on the makeup like she hasn't since you were dating. She showers a lot and takes longer lunches. Her text message alerts on her phone go off, prompting her to giggle and blush. You ask her what's up. Oh, just a friend saying something funny, she says. You even hear her mumbling another man's name in her dreams at night. You know in your gut something is amiss. You suspect a betrayal is happening right under your very nose, but you have loyalty to this relationship. Not to mention the fact you don't want to be made to look the fool, and you're scared of what the endgame is should your suspicions prove to be true. This has been the only life you've ever known. If you confront her and she doesn't want to work through the situation, can you handle living life alone? Are you really going to start dating all over again? Will you ever be able to trust again, even if you were? Not yet ready to wrestle with those questions, you decide to punt and kick the can down the road for now. Essentially, you decide you would prefer to live a lie rather than confront the potential truth. Weeks go by and you pretend to be blissfully ignorant, but in the back of your mind, the lack of intimacy between you and your wife is starting to really gnaw at you, especially since you're pretty convinced another man is rubbing your rhubarb. But again, the thought of confronting the truth is just too painful. Until one day, you come home from work early, and there's a strange car in your driveway. You unlock the front door and are greeted with awkward noises and moaning coming from upstairs. Your instincts have you climbing the stairs to see what's going on when you really don't want to know. The front door to your bedroom is wide open. You reach the top of the stairs and peek through the doorway, only to witness your wife carrying on with another man in the middle of the day in your own bed. Shattered, you say not a word as you descend to the bottom of the stairs. You walk into the family room, looking out the window, pondering your next move. Emotionally, you're a mixture of anger, revolt, and defeat. All of a sudden, you hear the refrigerator door open in the kitchen. But before you walk over to see who it is, you are confronted with the image of a naked man drinking one of your favorite beverages, walking right past you like it's nobody's business. He doesn't even acknowledge you're there, while he sits down in your recliner and leans back to bring the footrest up. He says not a word until he brazenly asks you, "Hey man, do you know where the remote control is?" This is the point of no return grassroots patriots have reached with the current leadership of the Republican Party. Ronald Reagan once famously said, "I didn't leave the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party left me." These days, millions of grassroots patriots around the country feel the same about a Republican Party seemingly hell-bent on abandoning every principle other than crony capitalism. Recently on Fox News, conservative rock star Sarah Palin channeled that frustration when she said, quote, "I love the name of a third party, Freedom Party, and if the GOP continues to back away from the planks in our platform, from the principles that built this party of Lincoln and Reagan, then yeah, more and more of us are going to start saying, you know what? What's wrong with being independent? Kind of with that libertarian streak that much of us have. In other words, we want government to back off and not infringe on our rights. I think there will be a lot of us who start saying, GOP, if you abandon us, we have nowhere else to go except to become more independent and not enlist in one or the other of the private majority parties that rule in our nation, either a Democrat or a Republican. Remember, these are private parties, and you know, no one forces us to be enlisted in either party." Whenever I'm asked about this, and I'm asked about this a lot, I usually say, I'd like to try a second party before thinking about a third one. Venting frustration is one thing. Acting upon it is entirely another. When we're frustrated, there are plenty of things we can justify as a response, but many of those things aren't necessarily prudent. That's why we have the saying, cooler heads prevailed. On the other hand, there is certainly a time and a place to fashion a whip of cords or grab the jawbone of an ass and give him your best Howard Beale. So is it time for us to abandon the GOP or continue to try and reform it? Let's do a cost-benefit analysis before deciding. Number 1, the vision. Here's the cost. With the light of liberty barely a flicker, the absolute worst use of time for conservatives would be essentially starting over to form a third-party movement that may take decades to realize. Given how much freedom, liberty, and morality we've lost, our constitutional republic probably doesn't have decades. We need to do as much good as we can, and we need to do it right now. Benefit. Loyalty to the Republican Party has done nothing to squelch our slouch towards Gomorrah or statism. We've wasted years as it is, propping up neo-statists and gutless rhinos with little to nothing to show for it.
So this is, he calls it chapter 12, but anyway, it's the final chapter, and this is the first part of that chapter. But I wanted to cut in and say, why is it that the Republican Party is moving away from, not only from conservatives, but from its own party platform? And that's because winning is everything. Why? Because both parties are in a race to have one-party rule. Both parties want one-party rule. They want to dominate every branch of government, the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. And because of that, we then get into this situation where it's win at all costs. And that means if you have to abandon your principles, I'm sure the leadership figures, well, once we get into a situation where we have one-party rule, Republicans are running everything, then we'll go ahead and sit down and look at our principles. But usually that doesn't happen. Anyways, what needs to happen is we've got to get rid of this idea of one-party rule. And we do that by getting rid of the idea that there are Democrat causes or Democrat issues and Republican issues. There aren't. There's only American issues. And it is the job of both parties to convince all voters, not look at voters in terms of Democrat voters and Republican voters and independent voters, but just as American voters. That's what they should be doing, and trying to appeal to more American voters than the other side, and competing with one another for all votes. And we can do that by recruiting. You and I can do that. We can recruit Democrats, right-thinking Democrats. Democrats that are socialists can stay in the Democrat Party. Everyone else we should be competing for. We should be doing our best to convince feminists that they belong in the Republican Party, because we're the party of power for women. And we can use Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene as a couple of examples. There's a whole bunch of other examples that we can use in that direction. And in terms of abortion, that's simple. The reason that there's women that support abortion in the Democrat Party is because they think it's power. And we have to convince women that there is no power in abortion. Not for women anyways, that the power is for men, and that therefore women should give up the idea of having abortions, and instead they should look to child support as the power. The true power is in being able to tell Mr. Frat Boy, okay, you want to sleep with me, that's fine, but if you get me pregnant, you're going to be paying child support for the next 18 years. That's power. So we can convince them of that. Convince the Democrats that we are the party of the environment, etc., etc., etc. And we can do it. And the reason we can do it is because the left always leaves their terms undefined, so that they have the flexibility of using them as metaphors and using them as weapons. So we simply define these terms for them. Why not say oil is green, coal is green? Why not? The left doesn't define what is green or not green, because again, they want to be able to use the word green as a weapon. So if we simply say that we are the party of the environment of what's green, and we also need to remind people that it was the Republicans that created catalytic converters and unleaded gasoline, among other things, not Democrats. AOC didn't roll up her sleeves and build anything to help the environment. All she's done is talk a good game. The same thing with Democrats, all Democrats. They're great at talking. They're great at trying to boss people around. But when it comes actually down to doing something, putting on a hard hat and a pair of gloves and getting to work, they disappear. And it's the Republicans that are the ones that have actually done the hard work of reducing pollution on land, water, and air. So if we go ahead and recruit, this is going to force the Democrat Party, number one, not to take their people for granted. They're going to have to compete with the Republican Party to say that they're better at these issues than anyone else. And if the Democrat Party is fairly shrewd, they will try to recruit Republican voters, try to convince Republican voters that they are better as defenders of the Second Amendment than the Republican Party is, et cetera, et cetera. And then when we have that happening, now we're in a position where we are back in charge. We, the people, are back in charge, and the political parties answer to us. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
You know, there can be a reduction of Christianity to being morally upright. As Flannery O'Connor put it, having a heart of gold. That's what Christianity is all about. No, it's not. Because, anybody of goodwill can do morally upright things. And people of any religious background. People of no religious background. Atheists can be morally upright people. Jesus didn't come simply to make us do nice things. He came to make us new creations. You cannot enter the kingdom that he's talking about unless you are born from above. You're born again. You become somebody new through water and through the Holy Spirit.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Ayn Rand quote of the day. Quote, "Do not confuse altruism with kindness, goodwill, or respect for the rights of others. These are not primaries, but consequences, which, in fact, altruism makes impossible. The irreducible primary of altruism, the basic absolute, is self-sacrifice, which means self-immolation, self-abnegation, self-denial, self-destruction, which means the self as a standard of evil, the selfless as a standard of the good. Do not hide behind such superficialities as whether you should or should not give a dime to a beggar. That is not the issue. The issue is whether you do or do not have the right to exist without giving him that dime." Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
Fair enough. All right. Thanks very much, Lauren. Now this. Developments in the Mideast looking ominous. America has now retaliated for the attacks on our troops. Overnight, F-16s hit facilities in Syria used by forces linked to Iran. Earlier this morning, Iranian-backed forces in Yemen aimed rockets at Israel. Actually, they were drones. A couple of drones launched from Yemen towards Israel, but they landed in Egypt, injuring 6. Israeli tanks have made another incursion into Gaza. Hamas is still using Gaza as a launch platform. Today, they fired rockets toward Tel Aviv. 3 injured. thousands in bomb shelters. Our own Trey Yingst asked Israel's defense minister how long a ground invasion might last. He replied, months. Now to the politics of all of this. A new poll shows a plunge in President Biden's approval rating among Democrats. 86% approval in September, down to 75% just 1 month later, down 11 points. Why is that? Biden's support for Israel is unpopular with the left wing of his party. Perhaps this is why Biden has leaned on Netanyahu to delay the ground invasion. The president knows an invasion would create powerful visual images which would inflame opinion worldwide. That's where we stand ahead of the weekend. America goes on offense, Israel prepares for ground action, and the president's political position in his own party deteriorates. This weekend is a test. How strong is the president's commitment to the defense of Israel? How strong is his commitment to countering Iranian attacks on American troops? Let's bring in our colleague, Jason Chaffetz, joining me in New York this morning.
No, let's skip Jason Chaffetz. The whole thing, if you listen to it very reasonably carefully, you don't have to listen to it very carefully, is value-free. Not one point does he say use the W word wrong, use the R word right, use the S word should. He makes no value statements. He makes no judgments. The reason that he doesn't do that, again, is that he's been intimidated by our enemies who have said for decades, don't judge, don't judge, don't judge. And so he obeys. He obeys. And so what do you end up with is you end up with somebody this neutral crap. It says nothing. It's a waste of time. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Varney and Company.
China, and we need to be smarter about that.
Brent Sadler, thanks for being with us this morning. Appreciate it, sir. Very much. Thank you. We know that the Democrats are split over their support for Israel. Got that. But, Lauren, I'm curious, where do the GOP presidential candidates stand?
They're also split. Ron DeSantis was on Fox and Friends today, and he says, look, it's Israel's war. And he called Biden's foreign policy rudderless, and he's worried about U.S. troops in the region. Watch here.
It's not clear to me that we have enough troops to really make an impact with whatever they're trying to do, and yet we have enough troops to where they're going to be able to be targets. And so they're kind of sitting ducks there. I don't know what the strategic objective of them being there is, but this is an example of, I think, Biden's rudderless foreign policy.
What about the candidates?
So there he is saying nothing, being neutral. He says, I don't know what this is. I kind of think that if you don't know what you're talking about, Mr. DeSantis, shut up. Shut the F up. That's all you have to do. But or make a bold statement. If you're going to say something, say something. Come out in support of or in defiance of whatever it is. Come out and say, Joe Biden is wrong. Another thing that he can do and should have done is, since he's a presidential candidate, is make a promise. My promise to the American people is that when I'm elected, I'm going to handle this kind of situation this way. But he doesn't do that. He stays neutral, gives him plausible deniability. He needs plausible deniability because he's scared. Back in a minute. Thank you. So on Varney and Company, he's talking about the shooting victims. No, murder victims. There was an individual that apparently is some political type. I don't know his name. I don't care. Who was supposedly pro-Second Amendment and was against gun control and whatnot. And then all of a sudden, he was reported yesterday that he switched sides and he wants a ban on assault weapons. And so two things about that. Number one is, does that mean he's not conservative? No, that in and of itself doesn't mean he's not conservative. Conservatives can disagree about policy issues. Now, what it depends on whether or not he's conservative or gone over to the left, depends on why he's doing it. If he's doing this because he's scared for himself and his family, he's conservative. If he's doing this because he thinks he's going to create paradise or some brave new world, then he's gone left. Second thing about this is his switch is because of what? Shooting. It's as I've said before, if you frame the argument and frame the problem as a shooting problem, the only solution to that is to get rid of guns. Guns are the only thing that shoot. If you frame it as a murder problem, then it's a crime issue. And we solve that problem with perhaps more law enforcement, perhaps beefing up the DA's office, that kind of thing. Or if this guy is as insane as he's supposed to be, then we have to find out, how is it that he got a gun in the first place? Why is he still in the military? And again, the whole idea is, why have new laws if the existing laws aren't being enforced in the first place? But again, my point is, if you're going to frame this as a shooting problem, the only possible solution is to get rid of guns. Frame it properly and we can win. Frame it as a murder problem. Back in a minute. Thank you. So one of the things that you want to listen to as the Republican primary shapes up is how many of the candidates are willing to make promises. And you're going to find there's only three candidates that are not lawyers: Donald Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Tim Scott. Tim Scott got his degree in political science. But all the other candidates are lawyers. And the reason that's important is because there's a book called Under Promise, Over Deliver. It was written by a lawyer for lawyers. And the idea is that if you under promise, then the results then will be better than what you promised, and you'll look like some kind of a hero or something. Really, all you're doing is lying to your clients now and making yourself look bad in the process. Now, when you take this to politics, if under-promising and over-delivering is good, then what about taking it to its logical extreme, which is to promise nothing but take credit for everything? That's what they want to do. All the lawyers in the field want to promise nothing so that they can then go ahead and take credit for everything. Anything that happens good on their watch, they can say, come out and hold a press conference and claim, if not directly, indirectly claim credit for that success. So watch for that. Ron DeSantis, who's a lawyer, he was on TV the other day or today, talking about Joe Biden and his how he's handling the situation in Israel. Ron DeSantis had the opportunity while he was making that having that interview to say, I'm running for the president of the United States. If you elect me, I promise, and then fill in the blank, whatever promise he cares to make. But he doesn't do that. Why? Because he's a lawyer. He's been influenced by this idea of under-promising and over-delivering, or in the case of politics, promising nothing and taking credit for everything. So he doesn't dare make any promises. Neither does Chris Christie, neither does any of the other lawyers in the field. So look for that. See if any of these lawyers have the guts. And if we had anybody on the ball in the debates, the first question out of their mouth would be, every candidate needs to tell us what they promise to do and see how they handle that. And you know that Vivek Ramaswamy has already made promises, so he'll be able to list 3, 4, 5 right off the top of his head. I don't know if Tim Scott has made any promises, but it should be, again, easy for him to do. And then all the lawyers are going to probably choke. And that'd be interesting to see. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Greg Gutfeld.
Weird and amazing. The further away we get from Trump 2020, the closer he gets to the White House in 2024. Everything that he's done just looks better and better. Between inflation, home prices, a hot war, a cold war, a broken border, decimated cities. It makes you dream of a strong country whose only problem was an intelligentsia plagued by mean tweets and crass jokes. We lost Trump because the media preferred peace of mind over actual peace. And now Joe's got to be worried because there's a major wake-up call going on in his party. Jewish Democrats woke up October 8th and found that all their allies that they supported now see them as part of the problem.
And that was Greg Gutfeld. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Aristotle for Everybody. Difficult Thought Made Easy by Mortimer J. Adler.
Chapter 18. Telling the truth and thinking it. The word truth has been used over and over again in the two preceding chapters. Since those chapters are about the way the mind works and about thinking and knowing, it is quite natural that reference to truth and falsity should have been frequent. When we know something, what we know is the truth about it. When we try to think correctly and soundly, our effort is to get at the truth. I thought it possible to use the words truth and falsity, or true and false, without explaining what they mean, because everyone does understand what they mean. They are common notions commonly used. The question, what is truth, is not a difficult question to answer. After you understand what truth is, the difficult question, as we shall see, is how can we tell whether a particular statement is true or false? The reason why I say that everyone, as a matter of common sense, understands truth and falsity is that everyone knows how to tell a lie. Every one of us has told lies on one occasion or another, and everyone understands the difference between telling a lie and telling the truth. Let us suppose that I think a certain restaurant is closed on Sunday. On a Sunday morning, you ask me whether that restaurant is open for dinner that evening. I tell you that it is. For the moment, let us not be concerned with the reason why I lied to you. My lying consisted in saying in words the very opposite of what I think. I said that a certain restaurant is open for dinner when at the same time I think it is not open. To say is when you think is not, or to say is not when you think is to tell a lie. To tell the truth is the very opposite of this. It consists in saying is when you think is, and is not when you think is not. An American philosopher who taught at Harvard University at the beginning of this century wittily remarked that a liar is a person who willfully misplaces his ontological predicates. Is and is not are what he meant by ontological predicates. A liar, in other words, is a person who intentionally puts is in place of is not, or is not in place of is. To tell the truth, then, is to have what one says in words agree with or conform to what one thinks. To lie is not to say in words what one thinks, but the very opposite of it. As I said a moment ago, everyone understands this. All I have done is to spell out, as explicitly as possible, what everyone understands. I have done so as preparation for Aristotle's simple, clear, and common-sense answer to the question about what makes our thinking true or false. His answer is that just as telling the truth to another person consists in an agreement between what one says and what one thinks, so thinking truly consists in an agreement between what one thinks and what one is thinking about. For example, if I am asked whether Christopher Columbus was a Spaniard or an Italian, I think truly if I think he was an Italian, and falsely if I think he was not an Italian. This one example suffices for an understanding of Aristotle's explanation of what makes our thinking true or false. We think truly, or have truth in our mind, if we think that that which is, or that that which is not, is not. We think falsely, or have falsity in our mind, if we think that that which is not, or that that which is not, is. In the case of telling the truth to someone else, the agreement is between what we say in words to another person and what we actually think. In the case of thinking the truth, the agreement is between what we think and the facts as they are. Truth consists in a correspondence between the mind and reality. We express most of our thoughts in words, whether we are speaking to ourselves or to someone else, or writing our thoughts down in some fashion. Not all the thoughts we express orally are either true or false. Aristotle points out that questions are neither true nor false, nor are the requests we make of others, nor the commands we give. Only declarative sentences that contain some form of the words is and is not, or that can be rephrased to contain those words, are true or false. This should not seem surprising in view of the fact that Aristotle's understanding of what makes a statement true lies in its agreement with the facts of the matter. Declarative statements are the only statements that try to describe the facts, the way things are. Only such statements can either succeed in doing so or fail to do so. If they succeed, they are true. If they fail, they are false. It would appear, then, that statements that are prescriptive rather than descriptive cannot be either true or false. A prescriptive statement is one that prescribes what you or I ought to do. How can a statement that says that I ought to devote more time to reading books and less to playing games be true or false if truth and falsity in the statement of our thoughts consist in an agreement between what we assert or deny and the way things are or are not? Being able to answer that question is of great importance. If there were no answer to it, statements about the goals we ought to aim at in life and about the means we ought to employ in order to reach them would be neither true nor false. Everything we learned from Aristotle about the pursuit of happiness, in part 3 of this book, might still be interesting as an expression of Aristotle's opinions about such matters. But he could not claim, and I could not claim, truth for his recommendations about what we ought to do in order to achieve the good human life that we are under a moral obligation to try to achieve. Aristotle obviously thought that his teaching about the good life and how to achieve it was true. Therefore, he must have had an answer to the question about the truth of statements that contain the words ought or ought not. He did. He said that just as a descriptive statement is true if it agrees with or conforms to reality, so a prescriptive statement is true if it agrees with or conforms to right desire. What is right desire? It consists in desiring what one ought to desire. What ought one to desire? Whatever is really good for a human being. What is really good for a human being? Whatever satisfies a human need. The statement that a person ought to desire whatever is really good for himself or herself is a self-evident truth. It is self-evident in the same way that the statement that a part is less than the finite whole to which it belongs is self-evidently true. Just as it is impossible for us to think of a part that is greater than the whole to which it belongs, or of a whole that is less than any of its parts, so it is impossible for us to think that we ought not to desire that which is really good for us, or that we ought to desire that which is really bad for us. Among our human needs is the need for knowledge. Knowledge is really good for human beings to have. Since right desire consists in desiring what we ought to desire, the statement that we ought to desire knowledge conforms to right desire. Because it conforms to right desire, it is true, according to Aristotle's theory of what makes a prescriptive statement true. We've just taken the easiest step toward answering the question about how we can tell whether a statement is true or false. A statement such as, "A finite whole is greater than any of its parts," reveals its truth on its very face. As soon as we understand the terms that make up the statement, whole, part, and greater than, we immediately see that the statement is true. It is impossible to understand what a whole is, what a part is, and the relation of greater than, without at the same time understanding a whole to be greater than any of its parts. There are not many statements we can make that are self-evidently true in this way. The statement that what is really good ought to be desired is one of them. But its truth is not as manifest as the truth about wholes and parts, because it is easier for us to understand wholes and parts than it is to understand the distinction between real and apparent goods, and the distinction between what ought to be desired and what is in fact desired. We sometimes call statements self-evident that are not self-evident. When we do so, we usually wish to recommend them as generally acceptable truths. acceptable without any further argument. That is what Thomas Jefferson did when he wrote in the Declaration of Independence that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and so on. These statements may have been accepted as true by the signers of the Declaration and by others, but a fairly extended argument would have been necessary to establish their truth. What I have just said indicates another way in which we can tell whether a statement is true or false. If it is not self-evidently true, its truth may be established by argument or reasoning. According to Aristotle, the truth of some statements can be demonstrated in this way. Two conditions are required for the demonstration or proof of a statement's truth. One is the truth of the premises used in the reasoning. The other is the correctness or validity of the reasoning itself. Let the statement be, the United States is larger than the state of New York. Two premises are needed to establish its truth. One is, a whole is larger than any of its parts. The other is, the United States is a whole, of which the state of New York is one part. From these two statements, it follows that the United States is larger than the state of New York. The premises being true, the conclusion that follows from them is also true. Just as very few statements can be seen by us to be self-evidently true, so also very few can be seen by us to be true as a result of valid reasoning from true premises. The truth of most of the statements that express what we think is not so easily determined. In most cases, we remain in doubt about whether a statement is true or false. When we are able to resolve our doubts, we do so by appealing to the evidence afforded us by the experience of our senses. For example, if we are in doubt whether a certain building is 12 or 15 stories tall, the way to remove that doubt is to look at the building and count its stories. A single, relatively simple observation will tell us whether a statement about the building's height is true or false. The appeal to observation is the way to determine the truth of statements about things that are perceivable through our senses. You may ask whether we can trust our senses. Not always, but the way to check our own observation is to have it confirmed or corroborated by the observation of others. For example, as a result of my own observation, I may make the statement that the automobile that crashed into the wall was going very fast. Other witnesses of the same event may have to be appealed to in order to get at the truth of this matter. If all of them report the same observation, it is probably true that the automobile was going very fast when it crashed. The more witnesses who agree on this point, the more probable it is. A statement that is only probably true has the same truth that is possessed by a statement that we regard as certainly true. Either the auto was going very fast or it was not. A statement about its speed is either true or false. When we say that a statement is only probably true, we are not estimating the degree of its truth. We are assessing our own degree of assurance in claiming truth for it. Degrees of probability are not measures of the truth of a statement, but only measures of the assurance with which we can determine its truth. A truth that we affirm with certitude, such as the truth about wholes and parts, is no more true than a truth that we regard as only probable, such as the truth about the speed of the auto that crashed. Some witnesses are qualified to make observations that help us to determine the truth of statements. Some are not. For example, as a result of my own observation, I may say that the ring on your finger is gold. It may, of course, look as if it were gold, and still be only gold-plated. It is difficult, if not impossible, to tell which it is by unaided observation. Even an experienced jeweler would not give you an opinion about this just by looking at or handling the ring. The jeweler knows that there are ways of determining the real character of objects that look as if they are made of gold. By putting your ring to the appropriate test, and by observing the result of it, the jeweler, as an expert witness, can say whether my original statement about the ring is true or false. So far, we have considered statements about particular objects, statements about the height of a certain building, about the speed of a certain automobile, about the metal of a certain ring. The truth of such statements can be checked by observation. Sometimes, as a result of observation, our own or the observation of others as well, we can be relatively sure about the truth of the statement under consideration, Sometimes we're left unsure. Observation seldom gives us the certainty we have about the truth of statements that are self-evidently true or that can be established as true by valid reasoning. I say seldom rather than never because, according to Aristotle, some simple statements about observable objects are as evidently true as some general statements are self-evidently true. That there is a piece of paper in my typewriter as I'm writing this sentence is immediately evident to me. I do not need the confirmation of other witnesses to assure me of the truth of my statement about this observable fact. I am as certain of its truth as I am of the truth of the statement about wholes and parts. We are left with a large class of statements that we call generalizations from experience. Such statements as, all swans are white, or all Eskimos are short. Since it is impossible for us or anyone else to observe the color of all swans or the height of all Eskimos, observation by itself cannot establish the truth of these generalizations. A number of observations may persuade us that the generalizations are probably true. The larger the number of observations, the more we may be persuaded. Increasing their number can only increase the probability. It can never result in certainty that the generalizations are true. However, we can be certain that a generalization is false, even if we can never be certain that it is true. I pointed out in the preceding chapter that the statement, some swans are black, or even the statement, this swan that I'm observing is black, contradicts the statement, all swans are white. Contradictory statements cannot both be true. The truth of my observation that this one swan is black falsifies the generalization that all swans are white. In the light of that one observation, I know with certitude that the generalization is false. Aristotle's answer to the question about how we are able to tell whether a statement is true or false can be summarized by saying that we are able to do so by appealing to experience, on the one hand, and to reason, on the other hand. Sense perception provides us with one way of checking the truth or falsity of statements in question. In addition, Aristotle recommends that we always consider the opinions of others before making up our own minds, the opinions held by most men, or by the few who are experts, or by the wise.
And that was chapter 19 of Aristotle for Everybody, Difficult Thought Made Easy by Mortimer J. Adler. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.